Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spouse Transition Conversation. I am your host, Anna Larson. I'm a military spouse. I talk a lot about transition and I talk a lot about the things that happen during transition the military spouse community needs to be aware of. Now, deep breath. This conversation today is not always an easy one to have, but it is definitely a necessary one to have. We are talking about eating disorders, not just as a clinical thing that's out there happening to other people, but as a very real, very lived experience inside our military community. This means military spouses, but also veterans and service members as well. The stress of transition, constant moves, identity shifts, the weight of holding it all together don't just disappear. And sometimes they land in our bodies and show up as control, restriction, and even shame around food. Again, this is not about blame. It's about breaking silences and saying out loud so many of the things that too many of us carry in the dark. And it is about a way of helping you find resources and support, not just for you and yourself, but also for the families who love you very dearly. So if you've ever looked in the mirror and thought, no one will understand this about me, this episode is going to be for you to make sure that you know that you're not alone, that you are seen, and that maybe just having this conversation can change everything. I do like to always start our conversations like this with a little disclaimer. This is not medical, legal, or mental health advice in that sense. This is a conversation we're having with an expert on this topic about real lived experiences. And so please seek out a professional for any professional advice that is needed. And we will give contact information today. So, with that, meet Leah Stiles, the founder and CEO of Sea Waves. Sea Waves is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for, educating, and supporting active duty service members, veterans, and their families who are dealing with disordered eating, eating disorders, and body dysmorphia. With 20 years of service and retiring as a Navy senior chief, she developed a strong commitment to supporting the well being of her fellow service members. Having personally navigated the challenges of eating disorders during her service, she recognized the critical need for specialized support. Through Sea Waves, Leah is dedicated to offering crucial support and resources for prevention, recovery, and resilience. She strives to be a lighthouse, shining light on this often taboo issue and guiding others who may be in the dark or weathering their own storms. What a beautiful bio. I just get all the feels when I read that. I'm excited to bring Leah up. Let me add her to the stage. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited that you and I are going to be having this conversation today. We did have a little bit of a chat back in the green room area before the podcast started, and it was really just more about how this is probably so much more prevalent than I think anyone even realizes. So, thank you for being here today because I think that this is going to open doors and understanding in so many different areas and with so many different people.
Yes, and I absolutely love the way that you opened. This could be a difficult conversation and maybe a triggering conversation. And these things, they grow and they thrive in secrecy. So, the best thing that we can do to really be a part of the solution is to start with talking about it. So, I love the opportunity to be able to talk about it, to really be able to dive in and answer questions through my experience, through my lived experience, not only with an eating disorder, but I served active duty for 20 years. But during that time, my spouse was also active duty for 20 years. We actually retired the very same day. And now he's active duty, he's Navy as well. And so I feel like I wore a few different hats and got to really look at this through a few different perspectives. And I love to be able to share that.
First of all, transitioning out on the exact same day is crazy. I don't even know how you guys did that. That's a whole other conversation for another time. But second, thank you for sharing that. I know when we talked behind the scenes, I wanted to make sure that you were comfortable. You said, hey, I'm an open book. This is why I do what I do. So let me throw you in the hot seat. And Leah, let's just start with why do you have this passion for this topic? What is it that you've experienced that you would share with our audience about your personal history in this area?
Yes. So for so many years, I was hiding the fact that I had an eating disorder. I was diagnosed with my eating disorder when I was 11. So long before I ever joined the military. And then serving throughout the 20 years and be able to experience that while also having an eating disorder, I had a behind the scenes look of being able to assess things, what's available, what's provided, what kind of education does military leadership have, who's eating disorder informed, who's misinformed at different points throughout my career. I literally almost died. And I realized if me as at one point a senior chief couldn't access the kind of care and resources and treatment needed to save my life, that there were others and they probably have less access than I did. I always had a great network, and usually you can access things when you have a great network. And so when I started doing the research and really digging into how many others were also suffering, I mean, I was able to see it. I'm not going to lie, Anna, there was definitely nights that I wished somebody else would do this. Somebody else would build a nonprofit or make an education program or make it known. And then at one point, I just realized that that was meant to be my purpose and my passion.
Oh, wow. How did that feel saying to yourself there were times where your life was in peril because of this situation? That's the way you were describing it. You literally have seen that without the right resources and support, that somebody could die from something like this, and where that should never ever be the case.
Most people don't realize that eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of all mental health issues.
Wow. I did not realize that. So just so everyone knows, there's lots of times I'll say something, people will be like, "What? I had no idea." And I said, "That's going to be me today." Because I am not educated in this area, which is one of the reasons I'm so glad that Leah is here with us talking about this, to know that it's the second most common cause of death for mental health disorders is just shocking to me. Okay, so let's jump into the questions because I really want to make sure we have a good amount of time to really talk about what this is. So now in your bio, you had body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and then one other way of saying it. Can you go through those three different areas in your bio that you mentioned and what the designation of those are?
Yes, absolutely. And that's amazing that you caught that. So, what we do is we do deal with eating disorders, but we look at eating disorders on a spectrum. And so, if you look at it from like a green, yellow, red spectrum, you've seen it probably on the stress continuum. And so, disordered eating and those behaviors, they can fall anywhere on that spectrum. But we're finding that so many times when somebody doesn't have a diagnosis because they haven't been screened or they haven't seen a doctor that can recognize it and give this diagnosis, which is extremely hard to find, especially in the military community, that they felt like they weren't truly struggling. And so I do make sure that I broaden it when I'm talking that it's not just eating disorders. So if you haven't yet received a screening or a diagnosis, yet you are still struggling with a relationship with food and your body, then you deserve support and resources. And then sometimes that means helping you get your diagnosis
Yeah.
and get a screening. But as it stands right now, there's no standard screening tool for eating disorders. We don't get it at our yearly physical health exam. Gosh, I wish we did. Even at behavioral health, if somebody was to go say, "Oh, I'd like to be screened for eating disorders," most places will probably look at you with a deer in headlights. So it's not surprising that we're not seeing people with screenings and diagnoses yet. And we've come a long way in the last several years. So much respect to multiple doctors and scientists that have made it their life's work to truly try to get a number around how much this is impacting our community, our military community. But right now, the disordered eating statistic, they're showing 1/3 of females and 1/5 of males in our military community are struggling with a disordered eating. Sit that around approximately 10% of our community has received an eating disorder diagnosis. Still compare in there, but that brings me back to what you said earlier, is that you didn't think that you maybe knew somebody in your circle. And I'd ask you to reflect on everybody you've met in your military community over the past years that you could estimate 1/3 of the females and the 1/5 of the males were struggling.
which again is one of those shocking statistics. Look at the sheer number of people that I've met over more than 25 years of living the military life. That's a huge number of people that we're talking about. When you talk about disordered eating versus eating disorders, can you define that just a little tiny bit for our audience?
It's strictly a screen diagnosis.
Got it. Question two that I have for you, I want to really dig down about how this is seen in our military communities. Are there specific patterns of disordered eating that are more common in military connected individuals?
There's definitely more patterns that show up in our military community versus the civilian community. So much of what goes into many of the eating disorders also reflects the values that we show through our military community. Discipline, right? Discipline's a big one. And perfectionism, that's a really big one. And so we really see that show up and resonate in the eating disorders as well. For example, we'll take orthorexia. A lot of people haven't heard about orthorexia, and that's probably one of the most difficult ones to assess and diagnose, because what orthorexia essentially is, boiled down, is the obsession with healthy habits, being in the gym relentlessly, eating clean relentlessly. And so it can look like somebody you may even aspire to be like, well, gosh, they're always eating clean and they're always working out. And so it could really look as part of that discipline and perfectionism thing that we've been taught to look up to, but it can actually be a very unhealthy disorder.
What's the tipping point where it goes from being okay to now it's considered something that's no longer beneficial to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I get that a lot. And I have found that the best way to answer that is to be able to compare it to alcohol and alcoholism, right? Like, when is it okay for somebody that is normally just cool with having a wine or a beer or whatever after work to where that's not healthy for them anymore? And the answer really boils down to quality of life. Is it impacting your relationships? Is it impacting your work, your daily work? Is it impacting the other parts of your quality of life? To give an example, if it's your son's birthday and every year your special thing is you both share a bite of cake together or a piece of cake together, and you just truly cannot make yourself do that even for your son on his birthday, have a piece of cake. That's impacting your quality of life, memories, family relationships. That's like a soft example. Each person is different, but if you can start seeing where is impacting your quality of life.
I think that's a really great way to help people redefine it in their brain, because everybody knows you don't want to be an alcoholic. Then comes the eating disorders, and you're like, I'm being healthy or I'm keeping myself fit. And there's like almost a rationalism that comes with it that says that this can't be a bad thing. That tipping point comes when quality of life or when your behaviors become so extreme that you're no longer enjoying what you were able to previously. Okay, what are some signs if you're thinking in your head, "Oh, I know so and so, and I'm seeing this in them." Like, what is it that you would say, this is what you can watch for? This is how you might see some early signs if either you yourself might be wondering if this is where you're at, or if you are seeing it in a loved one or a friend or neighbor. What would you say are early signs of an eating disorder?
I'd like to actually answer this two ways. And so I'm reserving the next question for what do eating disorders not look like? But let's start with your answering your question of what can they look like? What are some signs? Some signs are increased anxiety around food and exercise. So first I want to make it clear that food is just a symptom of an eating disorder. It's not the actual issue or the problem, right? But it is a symptom that we can look at in order to assess things. So anxiety around food and food situations, avoiding social situations where there's food, preoccupation of shrinking your body, whether it is for a weigh-in for BCA or to get safe on the active duty side, or just trying to shrink your body for whatever time or reason it is, the number one indicator that somebody will develop an eating disorder is intentional weight loss. So if they're pursuing a diet That's usually the first indicator early on. So I don't want to, I don't want to give the impression that if you want to start a diet or lose weight, that it leads to that, but it's the number one you can really start to assess the anxiety and seeing how they react around food and social situations and body situations. There are some other signs based off the different disorders, which there's six. A lot of people don't realize that there's six different eating disorders. But if you look at ones based around restriction, you can see that a lot. That being said, I hid my eating disorder, which was partially restriction and partially purging. And I went through rotations of both of those. I hid them. People would call me out on my restriction a lot. Like, Senior Chief, we notice you don't eat at these events and you don't eat at lunch whenever everybody else does. And I would cover that and hide that by saying, oh, well, I'm intermittent fasting. And that was so approved. And like, I got praised for intermittent fasting. People would assume it's for 8 hours, but for me, I was sometimes going 8 days. Right. And so it's like digging into that conversation. Don't just say, oh, intermittent fasting, congratulations. That shouldn't be the automatic answer. Or sometimes I would say, well, oh, I can't eat anything here because I'm keto. Again, easy answer, and then automatic praise for sticking to my keto. But it was really just me covering up anorexia. And then when you look at the compensation side of things, when I would allow myself to eat or make myself eat sometimes based off the social situation. So for me in the Chiefs mess, right? You don't want to be the person in the Chiefs mess not eating. That would cause more attention on myself. So I would have this part of my eating disorder where I would look what other people are eating, their portion sizes, and then I would just mimic it, mirror it, or match it to feel normal or fit in. But then my brain, my eating disorder brain, had a rule that I had to get that out within 30 minutes. So I'm chalk right up to go purge. And so what are some things, how did people recognize when I was purging? Number one, when I walked out of the bathroom, my eyes usually puffy or runny, as you would see. Of course, I had my excuses for that I had allergies or whatever it was at the time. My hands and my knuckles are often dry, very dry and scaly or scabs from the acid on them. So those are definitely some signs. And then you could hear people and you can usually hear purging. If I didn't meet that 30-minute window of purging, of getting it out, then I would go into other kinds of exercise compensation. Oh, I'd go and I'd run 13 miles. And I had another senior chief say to me one time, I'm just so impressed how in the middle of the day you can go run a half marathon. Like, you're amazing. And I was so exhausted and just burnt out that I literally turned to him at one point and I was like, I don't run because I enjoy it. I ran because I had the piece of pizza with you.
Wow.
Towards the end, I would just say,
What? Oh, wow. Okay. This is really fascinating look into your personal experience. I really love that what you're saying is you need to be a little bit more intentional about what you're asking people and their responses. It's almost take a minute and break it down, not to seek out an eating disorder, but to make sure that you really truly understand this person. You got to get to know who it is that you're asking about and who you're around. It's about community and social relationships in that sense.
yes. And I'd go so far as to say leadership in leadership opportunities when you're talking to somebody. And yeah, so it's community, it's relationships, it's having a deeper level conversation. And yeah, it's not always about trying to dig into what's deeper, but I would say, as in always, if we're looking for like always answers, I would say always refrain from commenting on somebody's food or body choice or size. Unless, okay, well, oh, there's always an exception to always. Unless you're expressing concern, and that's privately, if you've pulled them aside and you're privately expressing concern. But like in social situations, to comment on, that you're so good, you only chose half a slice of pizza, you only chose half a cake, or their choices, you never want to make comments about that. And I will go so far as to say complimenting people's bodies. Like, I'm a girl's girl, especially, and I love to hand out compliments to people, to everybody, but I especially love to make women smile or feel good. And we feel like it's a good thing to say, oh my gosh, you have lost weight since I saw you last. You look amazing. And I would just challenge us to stop saying things like that. Even when you truly mean it as a compliment, it can be very dangerous.
Yeah. Is that it? Would you say the same thing about that, like in private? Like if you're just, it's just you and that person as opposed to saying it in front of other people? Because I also know if somebody's working very hard to get into shape or doing something to try and improve their health, whether that's exercising to get skinnier or I just was diagnosed with XYZ and now I'm changing my salt habits or I'm changing the amount of protein I have to have in my diet. Being able to say, you're doing a great job. Like it feels like there's that fine line between cheerleading and then I don't want to use the word objectifying. That's not what we're doing, but complimenting physicality.
I would just say to err on the side of safety, it'd be great to practice compliments that were not physically based. So if you are alone and you are seeing somebody working hard on something for themselves, then you can say, I am truly inspired by watching you care for yourself and the self-care that you're doing. You can compliment really just honestly anything but their body size and food choices, right? You can say, I can see how you've been showing up for yourself and setting boundaries and anything else that you're seeing that you can compliment.
I feel like we're going to have to come up with a download that's going to affirmations you can say that are not body focused. You know
That's a
what I
great,
mean? We
how
totally
much
should.
would be great on that would be great on our social media because our theme was independence and freedom from diet culture. And really being able to recognize like how much diet culture has infiltrated everything from our conversations and compliments all the way everywhere. So that would be great to give options of other things to compliment on.
Yeah, because I think people automatically go towards what do you look like? And again, it comes with that surface level of knowing someone as opposed to really being intentional about what are you saying to them and what is it that you really want to convey with that compliment? Like, what do you want to do for them?
So now I get to hop in and tell you the second part of the question that I wanted to answer of what eating disorders do not look like or what we think they look like. And that might help give a little bit more perspective about why we don't like compliment like that. I've started to really understand a little bit more how people that haven't lived their whole lives with the eating disorders view them and where they've heard of them and all these myths. Honestly, it's pretty intriguing to me. A lot of people reflect on the 90s, the Lifetime channel, something they watched was something they saw on one of the talk show hosts. I've led a few of my sessions, especially my leadership sessions with, first of all, try to name more than two eating disorders. And a lot of people don't realize there's even more than two. And then the one that they usually have heard of is anorexia. So I said, okay, great. Describe anorexia to me. What do you picture? What do you see? What do you know? What do you think? And I usually hear things like skeletal, tiny, malnutrition, bones sticking out. And then I say, look at me. I'm anorexic. Be much right here, but I'm telling you, I don't fit that criteria, and I never have. I never have. And the fact of the matter is, less than 6% of people with anorexia fall into the underweight category. So if that's what you're looking for, you're going to get it wrong 94% of the time.
Wow. Okay, you've referred a couple of times that there are 6 different eating disorders. Can you tell us just what those 6 are here? And then I'm going to ask where can people learn more about this information and really dig into those 6 things. So we're going to name them here, but I would love for people to have a resource to go to find out more.
Yes. Okay. So the top one most people have heard of is anorexia. And then there's bulimia. And then there's binge eating disorder. And then there's ARFID.
Okay.
Okay. And then what they did, because a lot of that is confusing and there's umbrellas and I'll explain how I got there. Then there's what we call OSFED. other specified eating or eating disorders. And that's where things that fall into there that we talked about, like orthorexia, which hasn't made it to the DSM-5 yet on its own criteria. However, it is an eating disorder. So it really fed an EDNOS, which is eating disorder not otherwise specified, are the two umbrellas. And I'll tell you why that's so important, because of one of the ones in OSPED is called atypical anorexia. So that's the term to describe the other 94% of the people that we talked about that have never been underweight. Most of us in the eating disorder community argue that it should be flipped. That should make it the typical one and then the underweight one atypical. When you look at me, before they came out with the two diagnoses many years ago of EDNOS and OSFED, I didn't technically qualify for anorexia because I didn't reach that underweight category. And though I was purging multiple times a day, I didn't qualify to be diagnosed with bulimia because you have to have two things to be diagnosed. You have to have purging or compensation behaviors and a binge episode. And I had never experienced a binge episode before. So I couldn't get diagnosed with bulimia either. So although I was suffering each and every day with cycles of restriction followed by purging and then extreme exercise, I didn't qualify for an eating disorder diagnosis, which leads us back to our very open conversation in the beginning of why do we talk about this is for everybody, disordered eating, body dysmorphia, and eating disorders, because I know what it was like to struggle, and there was no such thing as a diagnosis for me at that time.
Yeah. When you were in the thick of it, Leah, did you know there was something wrong? Or were you just so focused on just making sure that your personal restrictions that you'd put in place for yourself and you were not worrying about that other part of it? Tell me a little bit about that internal struggle maybe you went through.
Since I've had my eating disorder for over 30 years, I could answer that at different times. And there were times that I was absolutely so far in denial and secretive and lying through my teeth to hide it. There were other times that I was like, oh, this is a problem and it is taking over my life, my quality of life, everything. And I was just hoping that somebody would ask me or talk to me or challenge me or find help. Like I was really hoping for it. It didn't always probably look like that or translate into that. So I've experienced both. But I'll tell you, even when I knew that it absolutely was a problem, there is like a general underlying thought process with eating disorders that you never truly feel like you're sick enough. You never feel like you've lost enough weight or you're just absolutely never enough. In fact, I recommend the book Sick Enough. Like literally that's the title. And it really digs into that. And so I never wanted it to be a problem. And I didn't think that I was sick enough. And I was at an inpatient residential hospital living on an NG tube, the tube that goes up your nose and down into your stomach, and literally using that to live for years and didn't think I was sick enough.
Wow. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like, I thank you so much for sharing so much of this personal side of things because I think a lot of times, I think you're speaking to people that really need to hear those words, right? I think that sometimes there's probably so many military spouses or service members or active duty or veterans or whoever it is that's listening to this podcast right now saying, I'm not sick enough for this conversation. And just to put that into perspective of, there isn't a sick enough, right? If you are dealing with an eating disorder, that is what it is. It's not about being on the brink of dying versus just getting started, right? There's not that timeline of now we can support you in this area. And I think so many other mental health things that happen within us, there's a point where we say to ourselves, oh, but I don't deserve to feel this way yet. I haven't done XYZ, so I'm not at that point yet. And so anyway, I appreciate you being so vocal about kind of your process with this, because I think that's helpful for people and for people who are on the outside that are struggling to even understand that eating disorder process for the people that we know and love. It's very hard to not say, just stop doing that, right? There's this point where you just say, "Just stop, don't do that anymore." And it's not that easy. And trying to understand that struggle that happens internally. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about transition specifically and leaving the military community and those high stress. And it's really more about not so much transition as just those high stress moments. So
Mhm.
how do those high stress time frames affect or increase the risk of disordered eating for military spouses? And I'm going to just throw in, let's just talk about the whole military community here. I know this is military spouse focused, but really it's about, we're there for our veterans, we're there for our friends, we're there for whoever, right? So can you give us like those high stress, what that does in terms of the risk for this?
Yes, absolutely. So I want you to look at eating disorders as a coping mechanism. So in those high stress ways, just as you would see any other coping mechanism being utilized, this will show up in a very similar way. In fact, eating disorders are very comorbid. They go hand in hand with PTSD, MST, and the other things that we are more familiar with. So yes, in high stress times, deployments, transitions, you will see more of a reliability because there's a factor of control. And in our military community, active duty spouses, everything, we are limited as to what we control. And we are also limited by our coping mechanisms. Zero tolerance for drugs, that's off the table, not even an option. Alcohol, we've been trained, that's frowned upon. We're not going to use that as a coping mechanism. But what's normalized? Food and exercise. And what's extra normalized in the military community? Exercise, food, like our choices, it's a very normalized coping mechanism. And so you can, I hate to say it, but easily abuse it. And then there's more details to the factors of actual transition. So when you're leaving one command to go to the other, we may become more aware of our body, right? We don't want to check in to a new command wearing a bigger uniform than we're usually like. So we're going to want to shrink ourselves a little bit for that new command and do some of those things. We might connect these coping mechanisms to, well, I'm just going to shed a few pounds before checking into my new command, or moving and meeting the new spouses at the new place, any of those things. And we've recently been giving training. Another one of those facts that people are surprised about is that the number one cause of death for somebody with an eating disorder is suicide. And we know that in our military community that suicide numbers are high and higher than we would ever want or need them to be. And research is showing us that in times of transition, that suicide peaks. We know a lot of the common ones like deployment and moving, PCSing and things like that. That's just part of the community, and knowing that's when we have to support. And sometimes it may be so obvious. Oh, I love in our military spouse community, like how supportive we are around the obvious things. When somebody's new in town and they're moving and they have to unpack their houses, and so many of us veteran spouses are, oh my gosh, I have a plan and I'm going to help you get unpacked and we're going to know exactly what to do. And I got this list of how you can call the electric company and get your cable, and we know what to do and how to support. And I love that about us. But also let's challenge ourselves of what the things that could be invisible or that don't look how we thought or expected them to look. So let's remember that eating disorders impact people in all body sizes, males, females, lower ranking, higher ranking, spouses. In fact, the studies show that military spouses and children are 3 times more likely to have an eating disorder than our civilian counterparts.
And I can imagine, just based on what you were just saying about it being a coping mechanism, with the amount of change and high stress situation a military spouse does live within, whatever that active duty life looks like for them, that there are more than enough times where those high stress situations require some sort of coping mechanism. And that number is 3 times more likely than our civilian counterparts. So thank you also for just reiterating, doesn't matter what rank, what size, whether you're male or female, that it does not matter who you are. Everyone can be affected by this. If you are seeing some of those signs that we talked about earlier, don't just assume, oh, that can't possibly be it because they're a man. I think being a male is one of the big ones, right? They assume this is a female oriented issue, as opposed to it being something that crosses genders in that way.
Or yeah, people are very surprised about older or higher ranking people.
Mm.
But if you think about it, I had more to lose as a senior chief. I didn't want to lose my retirement, especially over half a pound or half an inch. And after my body had gone through years of yo-yo and abuse, towards the end of my career, it was harder to lose half a pound and half an inch. I was doing more and more desperate things. You have more to lose. You often have a lot more responsibilities and more stress. So coping mechanisms that maybe you didn't have earlier in your life or in your career can even develop then. Definitely don't let age or rank discourage you from expressing support and concern.
Yeah. So, Leah, let's say we've recognized that something is happening, whether it's our partner, whether it's an active duty service member, whether it's a veteran. There's a lot of times within the military community where we don't have these kind of hard conversations. There's stigma, there's fear attached to it. Anything that is mental health related has an automatic stigma attached to it currently. And whether that's recognized or not recognized, it happens. I'm going to lose my clearance, or my spouse is going to lose their job, or I have to be resilient because that's what spouses do is we act resilient, right? There's this thing that happens when we talk about mental health things. And so if you're recognizing that and you have that partner where you're like, they are not going to want to talk about this, they're not going to agree to have help, but I know that this is occurring. What would be your advice to them? How do you start that conversation? How do you push that conversation? Because you have to have it.
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, we would always want to start in a private conversation. This is not usually a group intervention thing. Those don't usually work out as well. Let's start with an individual conversation. We start with I statements. It's just I wonder if you're struggling. I've noticed that you don't eat at social events. I've seen you leave the head with your eyes running and then express the concern that you've had. What is leading you to have this concern? Then the next thing is because there is, like we talked about, a lot of defensiveness around mental health, around eating disorders. And so then I would normally lead into something like, you deserve support. Like, you deserve a life worth living. You deserve to feel better than this. You deserve to not have to go through this alone. So then really is setting the tone for, I'm not forcing you, I'm not pressuring you, I'm not backdooring you, I'm not reporting you. I'm just telling you what you deserve. And then it's know how to get them to exactly what they deserve, right? And so this is where it does get a little bit more tricky and more difficult, especially in the military community, because you do need specialized care and help, right? And so just as you wouldn't go to an orthodontist to get your tooth pulled, although it's the same region, you would want a specialist that does that. And so you want to get them specialized help. That's where I will plug C-Waves. Of the 45,000 veteran service organizations that exist, C-Waves is the only one for eating disorders. We are backed by the Pentagon. We're in Military One Source as the sole eating disorder resource. We're in the Wounded Warrior Project database. And so we're trying to get out there as that resource. I will specifically even go so far as to say, go to the resource page on the C-Waves website and you'll see lots of things. Like, you'll see other communities that we partner with and work with. You'll also see a bunch of free online virtual support groups, and they're for anybody and everybody. There's, like we talked about, middle-aged or LGBTQ, or you'll see a whole list of them. They are free. You'll also see at the top of our C-Waves page, of every page, is our relationship with the crisis text line. Unlike some of the other crisis lines, crisis text line is eating disorder informed. And if you use the code WAVES, if you text WAVES, WAVES, to 741-741, they'll already know on the other side that you have learned about this through a struggle with your body or food and you're in the military community. They have vetted resources. If your conversation excels above, that of those on the call center, they know exactly where to send you and get you help. And I also, another shout out, that is 100% confidential. Your call or your text with crisis text line will never end up at your command and your medical record, anything like that. It's free, it's virtual, and you don't have to be in a crisis. I know people that Aunt Joe was over for 4th of July and commenting on everything on my plate and how much weight I've gained. And they've gone in the corner in the Texas crisis line and just said, I'm in an awkward situation and I'm trying not to cry in front of my auntie. And they talk you through it. You don't have to be in a full conversation. Our name is exactly what we do. So support, education, awareness, wellness, advocacy, validation for eating disorders and suicide prevention.
Oh my gosh. Okay, first of all, I did not know that's what your name stood for. So thank you for sharing that. It was like a mic drop at the end right there. I was like, what? Your organization, it is a must for military spouses to have in that back pocket for their resource section. And I don't care if you're transitioning or if you're active duty or if you're just getting started or if you've been out for 20 years, this is a must to have. And I am very excited to be able to share this more widely. When you and I connected on LinkedIn, and I was like, I just don't know enough about what you do or why you do it or how it works. And I know that the people who are struggling with eating disorders have probably done more research than me, but I think this is something that does need to be part of that big conversation out there of, hey, watch for this. Our lives are so stressful as it is. This is one of the things that we need to add to that. Just keep your eyes out. Be mindful of your neighbor thought conversations. So thank you. I want to pull up your contact page. Tell if somebody is looking to reach out to you, tell them a little bit more about how you want them to reach out.
Sure. So yeah, starting at the top is our website. You can contact us using the contact us page. And there's also a form that you can fill out right there if right away you want to be connected with help. And then we'll discuss what level help is. It could be everything from an online support group to inpatient, everything in between. What's the best fit for you and where you're at? LinkedIn is that page right there. That's my personal page. I love to do more speaking engagements, podcasts, and schedule trainings and any opportunities. So that's my personal place to contact on there. That's the C-Waves Facebook page. And we give lots of information to follow along there. And then the bottom is Instagram. We have a really good community on Instagram. And again, there's posts daily on information and everything from affirmations on what to tell yourself to tools of how to find support and help. And then another thing of what we do, the E in Tips for Education, is we provide military eating disorder awareness and literacy training. We provide webinars, especially in the intersectionality of eating disorders and suicidality. And so feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you wanted to schedule any kind of training, whether it be for a command, an ombudsman group, or you name it, any kind of group that could really benefit from this knowledge and information.
Thank you, Leah. And I just want everyone to know you don't have to be furiously writing or screenshotting right now. All of this information will be in the show notes at millspouse-transition.com. And it will be for this show specifically. So we will have the direct links to everything she's talked about. We will have links to information about the crisis line that she discussed, any resources that Leah had mentioned, the book that she threw out during the podcast conversation. We'll make sure and have that in there. So if you want to pick that up and read a little bit more about not sick enough, then that's going to all be in there. So all of the things we've discussed today, you'll find in those show notes. So head to Milspouse Transition to grab those, just as an easy way to be able to connect with her directly. I just want to tell you, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being willing to have this conversation. Thank you for doing what you do and being so open, and you're easy to talk to about something that I think could be potentially a very hard conversation. You have learned how to say it with grace and kindness and love in your heart. And I appreciate that about you. That's not always something that you get when you're talking about mental health conversations. And so thank you. Please make sure and connect with Leah and all those places. You can find us on our email list, and we'll make sure and be emailing out those show notes on our next email that goes out as well. All right. So for everyone else that's out there, thank you so much for joining us today for this Milspouse Transition conversation.